Have you ever stood in church, sang every song, lifted your hands, closed your eyes, and then walked away feeling exactly the same? Or maybe you've watched someone worship and thought, wow, they must be so close to God. But have you ever stopped to wonder, can worship look real on the outside, while the heart is far from God? That is a serious question, because the Bible teaches that God is not impressed by beautiful songs if our hearts are somewhere else. In fact, some of the strongest warnings Jesus gave were to people who looked very spiritual on the outside. Today, we're going to look at 7 signs your worship may have quietly become a spiritual performance instead of a genuine relationship with God. This is not a message to make anyone feel guilty. It's an invitation to examine our hearts, because every one of us, including me, needs this reminder from time to time. And stay with me until the end, because the 7th sign is so easy to miss that many sincere Christians struggle with it without even realizing it. 1. You care more about looking like you're worshipping than actually worshipping. Imagine someone taking lots of pictures of a birthday party, but never talking to the person whose birthday it is. That would be strange. Sometimes we can do something similar with God. We become more focused on how we look than on who we are worshipping. We wonder, do people see my hands raised? Do I sound spiritual? Do I look passionate enough? Jesus warned about this. In Matthew 6 verse 1, he said, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others, to be seen by them." Notice those last words, to be seen. The problem wasn't that people could see them. The problem was that being seen had become the goal. I remember catching myself once during worship. Instead of thinking about God, I was wondering what people around me thought of me. The moment I realized it, I quietly prayed, "Lord, help me forget everyone else and focus on you." That simple prayer changed everything. But this next sign goes even deeper. 2. Your lips sing, but your heart is somewhere else. Have you ever sung an entire worship song, then realized you weren't thinking about the words at all? Maybe your mind was on work, school, money, tomorrow's plans. We've all been there. Jesus quoted Isaiah when he said, "These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." Matthew 15 verse 8. Think about that. Our mouths can say the right words, while our hearts are somewhere completely different. God doesn't only hear our voices, He sees our hearts. Sometimes it's better to sing one line with all your heart than 10 songs while your mind is somewhere else. And the 3rd sign is one I had to learn the hard way. 3. Worship stops when the music stops. Do you only feel close to God during worship songs? Then, as soon as the service ends, everything goes back to normal. The Bible teaches that worship is much bigger than music. Romans 12, verse 1, tells us to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice. This is your true and proper worship. Did you notice that? Worship isn't only what happens on Sunday morning. It's how we live on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, every single day. I remember a season when I loved worship music. I played it everywhere. But one day I asked myself a difficult question. Am I listening to songs about God more than I'm actually talking to God? That question challenged me. Music is wonderful, but worship continues long after the last song ends. Now here's a sign that many people overlook. 4. You want the feeling more than God's presence. Worship can be emotional, and that's not wrong. God created our emotions. Sometimes we cry. Sometimes we smile. Sometimes we're filled with joy. But emotions are not the same as God's presence. Some people chase the feeling instead of the Father. If the music moves them, they think God is near. If they don't feel anything, they think God has left. But God's presence isn't measured by our emotions. Hebrews 13 verse 5 reminds us that God has promised, "Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you." That promise doesn't depend on how we feel. Some of the deepest worship happens in quiet moments when our emotions are calm, but our hearts remain fully surrendered. And before we continue, if these Bible studies are helping you grow closer to God and keep your faith centered on His Word, consider subscribing to the channel. Every week, we share simple biblical lessons that encourage believers to grow in their relationship with Christ. Now let's look at the fifth sign, because this one affects more Christians than we realize. And 5. You worship in church, but ignore God the rest of the week. Imagine telling someone, "I love you," but never listening to them, never spending time with them, never caring what they say. Would those words mean much? Probably not. Worship isn't only singing, it's obedience. Jesus said in John 14 verse 15, "If you love me, keep my commands." Real worship changes how we live. It changes how we speak to people, how we forgive, how we treat our family, how we handle money, how we respond when life becomes difficult. If worship stays inside the church building but never reaches our daily lives, something is missing. And the next sign is one that quietly steals the beauty of worship. 6. You compare your worship with other people's worship. Comparison is dangerous. Maybe you think, "I don't worship as passionately as they do," or "I'm more spiritual than they are." Both thoughts take our eyes off God. Worship is not a competition. When Peter asked Jesus about another disciple, Jesus simply replied, "What is that to you? You must follow me." John 21, verse 22. That's a lesson for all of us. God isn't asking you to worship like someone else. He wants your heart, your voice, your surrender. When we stop comparing ourselves, we become free to worship honestly. Now we've reached the final sign. This one may be the most important of all. 7. You leave worship changed on the outside, but never on the inside. This is the hardest question in today's message. Is your worship changing your life? After spending time with God, are you becoming kinder, more patient, more humble, more forgiving, more like Jesus? If nothing changes except the songs you sing, then worship may have become a routine instead of a relationship. In John 4 verse 23, Jesus said, "The true worshippers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth." Notice that he didn't say, "the loudest worshippers," or "the most emotional worshippers." He said, "the true worshippers." True worship transforms us, not because the music is perfect, but because we have spent time with a perfect Saviour. When we truly meet with God, we cannot remain exactly the same. Little by little, He shapes us to become more like Christ. What are the signs that worship may have become a spiritual performance? You care more about appearances than God. Your lips sing while your heart wanders. Your worship ends when the music ends. You chase feelings more than God's presence. You worship in church but ignore Him during the week. You compare your worship with others, and your life isn't being transformed. The good news is this: God is not looking for a perfect performance. He is looking for a willing heart. 1 Samuel 16 verse 7 reminds us, "People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." What a comforting truth. God isn't grading your singing voice. He isn't counting how high you lift your hands. He isn't measuring how emotional you become. He is looking at your heart. And if your heart has drifted, you can come back today. No pretending, no acting, no performance. Just honesty, because God would rather hear one sincere whisper than 1,000 empty songs. So before you leave, ask yourself one simple question. If no one else could see me worship, would I still worship God with the same passion? That answer may reveal more about our relationship with God than anything else. And the beautiful news is this: the Father is still seeking true worshippers. Maybe today, He is inviting you to become one. Subscribe to join our faith community. God bless you.